So on today's video on the Micra, we're going to look at mounting the supercharger. So in the video we did the other week, we talked about our plans for the Micra, and that was to supercharge and turbocharge it. And in today's video, we're going to look at getting it mounted into the Micra. So this is the model of supercharger that we're going to be using. It's an Eaton M62. This is the Mercedes SLK specific one. You can tell it's the Mercedes one because it's got a short snout and it's got a clutch pulley on it. We've chose this one because after a lot of reading and some Googling, this was the shortest one we could find. We could have used an AMR like we did last year, but obviously we're looking to push a bit more power this year, so we're looking for a bigger unit to do so. So the first thing we need to do is get this mounted, and the first step in doing so is we're going to pick up these 4 holes. We'll get a ruler out, we'll measure the bolt centres and everything, and change that into a CAD drawing. And then once we've got that done, we'll then pick up these bolt holes on the supercharger. This one's going to be a bit more difficult because all 4 bolt holes are in different positions. It's not exactly a square, so I've got a bit of a cheat way to do that, and I'll show you how we will do that. So once you've got these hole centres of the engine and the hole centres of that into a drawing, we'll then work out where the holes for the supercharger have got to go on this plate, and then we're more likely to get a laser cut because it's cheap, cheerful, out of mild steel. And then as well as the supercharger, there's not really enough room on the back of the engine to mount the alternator without notching the chassis rail to get the belt clearance through. So we're more than likely going to do the same on the 1.3 with this engine, and that's we're going to mount the alternator down here underneath the supercharger. So yeah, first things first, let's get this measured. Let's get that measured and turn it into a CAD drawing. So that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So long story short, it works out roughly 90mm for the bolt hole centres from top and 110 from top to bottom. I have measured it off camera and the holes are dead square, so we've not got to worry about any offsets. But yeah, we're definitely within tolerance there. I always like to count for like a mil anyway, so even though they're an M10 thread, we'll probably have the holes drawn to 11mm just so we've got a bit of wiggle room on that. So that's the easy part done. Now let's turn our attention to the supercharger. And I'll show you a trick way to easily get the bolt centres of something where this isn't square. So what I mean it's not square is that these 2 bolt holes aren't in line with each other, and that's not in line with that one isn't in line with that one isn't in line with that one. So you can probably just about tell from there. But yeah, there's a dead simple way to figure this out. So for trick bolt centres like this, if you're a proper engineer, you could probably figure it out by measuring it. But if you're lazy and you want to do it the quick and easy way, you just use one of these, a flatbed scanner. So supercharger's now on the scanner. The important thing is to make sure you have a flat datum. And in our case, we've used the backside of the supercharger, this piece here, because it's nice and flat and parallel. So place it on the scanner, just push that to one side so it aligns itself so it's all straight, and then get yourself some long bolts, pop one in each of the bolt holes, and then scan it. So now we have scanned the supercharger, we have the image loaded up into our chosen CAD program, which in our case is QCAD because it's nice and basic. But the overall image of the supercharger is blurry, but the important parts is that we've picked up the bolt hole centres by using the long bolts. So the reason why we use long bolts is they touch the glass, which means when they scan, it makes them a lot clearer than the rest of the drawing. So the important thing is now is to make sure the drawing is scaled, so that when you produce your CAD drawing of the bolt centres, it's the actual dimensions. Every scan is different. In my case, I know that it's 0.127, and that now means that this drawing here is to scale. So the next thing is that we know that these holes here accept an 8mm bolt. So we'll just go in and draw a 9mm hole, roughly centre of each bolt. We're doing this freehand, like so. Don't forget to circle your nuts. So now we have the hole positions for the M62 Supercharger. So now we've got our hole centres, we need to make sure that the Supercharger is in the correct orientation. We're going to work with this drawing as if we're looking at the engine, as we were in the video clip a second ago. So passenger side of the car, driver's side of the car. So we need to mirror the drawing, and obviously then we know the pulley is going to be at the top, not the bottom. So yeah, that's the orientation that the Supercharger needs to be in. So now we've got these dimensions, we can get rid of the drawing and my nuts, and that gives us something to work off. So now we've got these bits in, we need to draw our hole centres for the engine, which we know is 90mm wide by 110 deep. We're just going to place a random square. This is my way I like to work. We know there are 10mm holes, so we're going to draw a 11mm hole to give us a bit of wiggle room. Once we've got that done, we can get rid of that. So now we have our hole centres for the engine and our hole centres for the Supercharger. So the challenge now is to figure out where these bolts have got to sit. So we've got our Supercharger in the right place for the pulley alignment. So now we've got the drawing, we've got a plate here which we're going to use to complete the mock-up process for the Supercharger. So what we'll do now is we'll email this drawing over to our good friends at ICB. We'll get them to laser cut it for us out of some thin material like 3mm mild steel, because it's pretty cheap. And then once that's cut, we'll bring it back and then we'll continue the mock-up process. And there we go, one laser cut mounting plate, well, mock-up mounting plate for the Supercharger. So next thing is we need to get this bolted to the engine, and it's going to be easier to take the engine out, put it on an engine stand, so we can rotate the engine to 90 degrees so that we're not struggling to hold the Supercharger up. So yeah, we'll just quickly take the engine out. It's only 4 bolts, so it'll take 5 minutes to put an engine stand, and then we'll continue with the mock-up process. And there we go, we've got the engine out. So next port of call is we'll quickly bolt the plate to the engine, and then we'll see where we can sit the supercharger. So the first issue that we've got is this part of the plate here is sitting on this engine mount, so it's not sat flat with the engine. So what we're going to have to do is use some thick M10 washers to space the plate up so we can clear this. Yeah, so we're spot on there. Let's get it bolted down. And there we go, one plate bolted to the engine. It looks a bit ridiculous, but by the end of the video you'll understand why we've done it this way. So this is the supercharger we're using, M62, as I've probably told you a million times before. I've already spent some time to level the supercharger so it's flat with the table. So we've got, with an engineer's square, we've got the pulley perfectly 90 degree to the table. And then on this side, we've got the flange 90 degree to the table, so we know that when we put that on the plate, it'll be, the pulleys won't be, you know, offset. So yeah, let's go quickly put the supercharger on that bracket. So I hope you're following, and I hope this all makes sense. So now we've got the supercharger stood on these little connecting nuts. We can't really lower the supercharger down anymore because obviously we need to make sure we've got clearance for a pretty decent sized bolt head on there. So now we've got it on the plate. We can't really mount it any higher than that because obviously don't forget we've got a turbo manifold to go here as well that we've got to make sure we've got enough room for. So next thing we need to do is just line these pulleys up. So obviously the belt tram and tracking is the same. And then from there, once we've got the measurements for the supercharger, we'll then go back to the computer and readjust the drawing, and then we'll look into the alternator. Right, so I've spent a few minutes making sure we've got the belt alignment right, and I'm happy where it is. So these are 13mm connecting nuts, or M8 connecting nuts, but they use a 13mm spanner. So the distance from the edge of the plate here, where my thumbnail is, to the flat of this is 5mm, both sides. And then the pointy section of it, whatever term you want to use, so this piece here where my thumbnail is, wants to be in line with the edge of this plate. And that puts, I mean you probably can't see on camera, but that puts the belt alignment between these two pulleys perfect, about dead on. So now we know what measurements we need, we'll go back into the CAD software. Obviously we've already drawn our 4 holes for the supercharger. We'll move them in relation to where this nut is, and from there we can start finalising the drawing for the supercharger bracket. So here we are back on the QCAD. If you remember, this is our original drawing of the plate we've had laser cut. So with the information we know now where the supercharger's got to fit, we can now move these 4 holes onto this plate so they have a relationship with these 4 bolt holes here. So we know we need a 5mm offset off this edge, so just going to use this tool here to give us a quick offset there. And then we need to make a 13mm wide hex, like so. So that represents the connecting nut that we were using. I'm probably using this software backwards to a lot of people, but it is what it is. So now what we need to do is we need to then bring this up here like so, and then because again I don't know how to use this software properly, I'm going to draw a line between this edge here and that edge there, I'll go ahead and get rid of that piece there. I can now select the 13mm hexagon, or a nut in this case, and then we can move this spline here to there. So now this connecting nut matches the same location that we've got on the plate on the engine. So now what we need to do is we're going to draw a 9mm hole in the center relation. In the middle there. And then what we can do is, because all these holes here are also 9mm, we can pick it up with this spline here, and then we can drop it on that spline there. So then let's get rid of the orange, and there we go. So now we've got these 4 bolt holes here which bolt the engine, and the 4 white holes which are our supercharger. So what we can do now is we'll just start this drawing up. Here's one I did earlier. So this is what the simplified version of the plate looks like to mount the supercharger. So now we've got this far, what we'll do is we'll go take this plate off the engine, and then what we'll do is we'll then weld these nuts to this plate just quickly with a couple of tacks. So that means we're not going to move the supercharger during the next phase, which is to mount the alternator. So yeah, let's go get this off the engine and let's go get some weldy. We have it. We have now got those nuts tacked to that plate. So when we do the next step with the alternator, we're not going to move the supercharger. So that's going to stay where it is. So what we'll do now is we'll quickly unbolt the supercharger from this plate. We'll go get this plate back on the engine and put the supercharger back on the engine, and then we'll go on to the next step with the alternator. And there we have it, one supercharger mounted to the lovely engine. Now our next task is to mount an alternator using the rest of this plate here, the area we've got here. Now I'm kind of already under the understanding that the alternator is more than likely going to be lower than the sump. But with this splitter, I know I've got a couple, at least an inch below the sump for the splitter. So as long as I don't go further off that plate, I should be fine. Otherwise I'll have to probably reconsider the aero or something, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just go dig an alternator out and we'll have a play. So we've got the alternator on there with the factory bracket that was off the old CG engine, but I'm hoping to reuse it for this. But straight away I can see there's going to be a clearance issue. So I've already measured, so from the flat of this engine mount here upwards, we've only got 8 inches to play with. And if you see where this 4 bolts are here on top of the supercharger, that is already about 7¼ inches. So we've not got much headroom there. Otherwise we'll more likely have to backdoor the intercooler to socket onto that. But unfortunately the alternator is just a no-go. So I think straight away I'm going to sack off the idea of using this bracket, and I'll have to come up with some other solution to mount the alternator. Yeah, let me go scratch my head for a moment. So I've been scratching my head for 10 minutes. We took the bracket off, and you can probably see we've still got quite a height difference here, but under this part here, so in between the engine and the sump, you know, we've got quite a bit of space there. We've got at least an inch. So what I'm thinking is, what we're probably gonna have to do with this plate here, we're gonna have to sort of maybe step it down, or make a couple of wing brackets to pick up a mounting point for the alternator. But I think if this bolt hole here was further sort of like down here, I think that would solve our clearance issues. And on top of that, so this is the one of the main mounting holes off the Micra's tensioning system for the alternator, because obviously the alternator is a tensioner. Obviously you can see we've not got much clearance there, so we're probably going to have to angle that up slightly so we can get that on. And I'm thinking we're more than likely going to have to bring some sort of substantial part of the bracket sort of in this area, so we can solidly mount the alternator, and then we can use this sort of area here to cut some sort of tensioning system. But as it is, that alternator is pretty much lined up with the other two pulleys, so I'm happy that the belt's going to track nice. I just now need to come up with a solution to mount this alternator temporarily. So, but in my head, I've already got an idea for the drawing, but obviously ICB is shut at this time of day on Saturday, so there's no chance of getting another bracket laser cut. So my only option is to get the grinder out, get the cutting wheel out, and then we'll come up with some sort of bracket to mount the alternator. So yeah, next task. And there we have it. We have the supercharger back on, we've got the alternator back on. It took a couple of attempts there, as you've probably seen in the footage, but I've got to where we are now. I had some laser cut profiles that we used for a couple of strut braces. They are very flimsy at the moment, but it's doing its job in retaining the reference point, so we can then get these drawn back up in the CAD software. Clearance wise, obviously we are touching here at the moment, but that's because the weight of the alternator on these flimsy brackets isn't helping. They're going to be done out of 6mm mild steel, the entire bracket, so you know, the finished product will be a lot stronger than what we've got here. And then there's a couple of clearance issues with the casting on the here and here, but we're going to redraw these brackets a bit differently, so we won't have that problem on the final one. Yeah, so the next thing is we need to come up with some form of tensioner system. Now, I really like the idea of using a sprung-loaded automatic tensioner. This is off a BMW Mini. Unfortunately, it's no good because I believe this is for a 5PK belt, and we're using a 6 rib belt, so I need to sit down at some point this evening and try and find a more suitable bracket. But we'll be looking to sort of mount it in this sort of orientation, so that way we get a decent wraparound of the belt around the supercharger pulley and the alternator pulley. Obviously, I always like to try and go for at least 50% engagement on the belt to pulley. That makes sure, you know, we limit the amount of slip that we could potentially have. And that's it for today's video. I'm going to split the footage up for the supercharger bracket just because I've run out of time today. It's going to take me a couple of days next week to get a new bracket cut, so there's nothing really I can do today, so I might as well get this video edited and uploaded for you to watch. So yeah, stay tuned. We've got some other bits and bobs to do to tell you really about the direction that we're going. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode, hopefully by the end of this week.